from a potential trade war. But President Trump is a deal maker, and there are deals to make for Europe too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Kelleher, seat number 9.
A very important debate here today in the Chamber, and certainly we don't want a situation where we make decisions on ideological views about whether we like President Trump or dislike him, but we must do it strategically. And obviously Europe has to stand firm in the potential threats of tariffs and tax changes. But from our perspective, we have to ensure that whatever other tariffs we put in place, that we don't do collateral damage to our own industries. And what I find extraordinary is those that were advocating for President Trump and Elon Musk during the last number of months, will they be the same people that will arrive in the car factories in Germany, Slovakia, in the Czech Republic and elsewhere, telling them why they're laying off workers due to the fact of tariffs on European products, on European manufacturing? Because simply tariffs will ensure that European industries will struggle. And equally from an American perspective, they will equally struggle in America. So longer term, a trade war is of no benefit either to Europe or the US itself. I would urge the Commission that in drafting up its proposed retaliatory measures, that it would look at it strategically, but that they would also continue to engage. Continue to engage, Commissioner. We all know that longer term there is no benefit in a trade war. It won't benefit the workers in European factories, and it won't benefit those in American companies either.
Thank you. Next speaker, Lucas Zipper. Please, floor is yours.
Dear people of Europe, I think Donald Trump would be happy about the frequency of the name Trump being mentioned here today, but let me be clear, he is not our friend. Someone who tries to dismantle the rule of law cannot be our friend. Someone whose friends perform a Nazi salute at a public event cannot be our friend. And I know this is hard for us because the US, historically speaking, is our friend. But Trump is nothing more than a spineless schoolyard bully, and that's how we need to treat him. But to beat a bully, you have to be able to pack a punch yourself. And that Germany cannot do, Estonia cannot do, Spain cannot do. But Europe, a strong Europe, can do. Give this Parliament the right to initiative, abolish the unanimity principle, and the exceptions to the 4 freedoms of the internal market due to national interests. Together we stand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we are closing HI procedure. Now I would like to ask to take the floor for the Commission. Maros Šefčovič, Commissioner, floor is yours. Sorry, I've been informed. Sorry, Commissioner. Sorry. I need the translation. Yeah?
Microphone for the speaker, please. Microphone.
What kind of problem do you have? Yeah.
I have my micro. Okay. De la 9 fără 10 prima la cash DI.
Since 2009 I take part in the debate and I was the first to register for KHTI. You should let us know that we have not a right to be in the KHTI if I have a blue card. This has to be said at the beginning of the reunion. This is unpolite and this is not according to the rules.
I am informed, taking over the chairing now, so it's that you are not registered on KHDI, as far as I understand. Okay. It was decided by my previous vice president colleague, and because we are in time limits, we are delaying vote, and that's why it was her decision. I cannot change it. Thank you. Please understand it. So, Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, the Minister, honourable members of the European Parliament. Our timely debate has proven how important international trade and multilateralism are for our place in the world, for our businesses and our jobs here. To all those who would like to close EU in any form, of protectionism, I would like to remind that almost half of our GDP depends on our exports, that 30 million people are working in export-related jobs, and 2/3 of our production in the European Union get inputs from abroad. So I believe that just these few arguments highlight how important trade is for the competitiveness of the European Union. Our clear stance on predictability, rules-based order and focus on mutually advantageous partnerships underscores our position of the global trade superpower and important trading partner. Therefore, you see the increased interest and new dynamics in our FTA negotiations, and this sends a clear signal. If some want to erect barriers, we extend our hand and offer free and fair trade partnership. Mr. Warborn, Madam Garcia Perez, Mrs. Hahn, Madam Pereira, Mr. Morero Sanchez and many of you supported this, and in this regard I have one strong plea. Let's be faster and more efficient. We do not have the luxury of time anymore. We cannot negotiate for decades and have ratifications that last long years. Each FTA we concluded brought benefits, new jobs, new markets, new opportunities for our businesses. And therefore, our debate today was very important, even though it was very much marked by the recent US announcement on steel and aluminium. And we have been very clear, and I would like to reassure Mr. Lange, Madam Wilmès, that unjustified tariffs like this will not go unanswered, that they will trigger firm and proportionate countermeasures. And I repeat that we will protect our workers, businesses and consumers. At the same time, let me recall that EU-US relationship is the largest on this planet. Volume of our trade represents 1.5 trillion euros per year. 4 billion of goods and services is crossing Atlantic Channel, Atlantic Ocean every day. 5 million jobs on both sides of the Atlantic depend on this trade, and 5 trillion of euros is the value of the EU-US assets on both sides of Atlantic. Looking at these massive volumes, the US deficit is 50 billion euros in trade of goods and services. This is 3% of our mutual trade. And taking into account that up to 300 billion of euros flies to US as investment from our pension funds and saving accounts of our citizens every year, I'm convinced that we should cherish and further develop our relationship. Therefore, we highlight the importance of constructive negotiations to resolve and not to further aggravate the situation. And in this regard, I would like to reassure Madame Van Brandt, also Mr. Kelleher, that we have no interest in a trade war. We are ready for the constructive negotiations, and we are also prepared for constructive engagement. By the way, this morning, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, will meet US Vice President Mr. Vance, and I will engage with my counterparts on these very issues in the coming days. So also I would like to reassure Madame Zhovko that we are ready for engagement and we are preparing for these talks. Last point many of you highlighted was the unity. Unity is our most important leverage and the feature which turned Europe into global trading superhouse. I can promise you that I'll do my best to work with you, with our member states and with our business leaders to make sure that our unity is as strong as ever. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And now I would like to ask to take floor for the Council Minister, Adam Szłapka. Floor is yours, Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, honourable members, Commissioner. Many thanks for this interesting debate on what is a fast-evolving topic. Let me reiterate what I said in my opening remarks. The EU remains committed to the multilateral trading system, which the WTO as its core. We do so because it works. We, however, not blind to the current geopolitical context and remain ready to use all our instruments to defend ourselves and the multilateral system in which we operate. In fact, being more assertive in protecting our economy from unilateral and unfair trade measures is not incompatible with working towards a positive multilateral agenda. As with so many other challenges that we face today, EU unity is our strongest asset to protect our trade interests. Thank you very much for your attention.
Paldies, Ministra kungs.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, and hereby we are closing the debates on this item of the agenda. And the next item on our agenda is the Council and Commission statements continuing the unwavering EU support for Ukraine after 3 years of Russia's war of aggression. And now I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Adam Šlapka again for the Council for 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Before you start, maybe allowed to change the seats for commissions. Sorry, just stay, please. Floor is yours, Minister.
Thank you very much once again, Mr. President, honourable members, Madam Commissioner. We are approaching a tragic anniversary, the 3-year mark of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. On 23 February 2022, Russia, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, launched unprovoked, unjustified and illegal aggression against Ukraine in manifest violation of the basic principles of the UN Charter and international law. But let us not forget that Russia's war of aggression started back in 2013 with the illegal annexation of Crimea and subsequent violence in Donbas. The consequences are tragic for Ukraine. Russia's continued deliberate attacks against civilians, targets and energy systems in the middle of winter cause massive civilian casualties and human suffering. Furthermore, Russia has targeted food storage and Ukraine's ports, aggravating global food insecurity. And the fallout goes far beyond Ukraine. Russia's war of aggression is a direct threat to Europe and wider international system. It has polarized international relations. It has undermined the rules-based international order, and it has fueled global crisis, especially regarding on food and energy. Since the beginning, the EU has been at the forefront of the international reaction against Russia's war of aggression. The EU has not only resolutely condemned Russia's aggression, but provided an unprecedented level of political, financial, economic, humanitarian, military and diplomatic support to Ukraine and its people. In the past 3 years, the EU and its member states have provided about €134 billion in support for Ukraine and its people. This includes more than €67 billion in financial, economic and humanitarian support, more than €38 billion in military support, and about €70 billion in support for refugees within the EU. Regarding assistance to refugees in particular, let me underline the enormous endeavour that EU societies, including in my country, Poland, have undertaken to welcome more than 4 million people fleeing Russia's aggression. This makes the EU, without a doubt, the largest provider of support to Ukraine. We are also using the extraordinary revenues generated by immobilised Russian assets to help Ukraine's self-defence and reconstruction. A first tranche of €1.5 billion was released last summer, and a second tranche of €1.9 billion is coming in April. In addition, the EU has subscribed to the G7 loan for Ukraine, where we are the main contributor. And our support is continuing. This year alone, EU supports to Ukraine's budget will over €30 billion. In parallel, the EU has imposed 15 packages of massive and unprecedented sanctions against Russia, aimed to significantly curtail its ability to sustain war efforts. Currently, we are discussing the 16th package of restrictive measures, aiming for its adoption by the 3rd anniversary of Russia's invasion. The support provided by EU institutions and Member States also extends to many other areas, including accountability for the crime of aggression, where work to establish a special tribunal is advancing. Despite the challenges caused by Russia's war of aggression, Ukraine's reform progress following the opening of the accession negotiation is commendable. We remain committed to support Ukraine in its efforts. Furthermore, the EU has also been at the forefront of political support to Ukraine, both in bilateral contacts with third countries and international fora, where we have sponsored all UN General Assembly resolutions on Ukraine. Today, let me once again confirm our unwavering support for Ukraine and its people for as long as it takes and as intensely as needed. Ukraine must prevail. Slava Ukraini. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Minister. Now I'd like to ask to take the floor for the Commission. Commissioner Kos, the floor is yours.
How many times after the Second World War we said never again? Then we had a war on the territory of former Yugoslavia. Soon we will mark 3 years since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. President, honourable members of the European Parliament, this is a sombre milestone. During these 3 years, the Ukrainian people have endured unimaginable hardship. Families have been torn apart and many lives have forever changed. 3 years of children learning to read in underground schools. 3 years of people worrying about their loved ones. 3 years of running for shelter almost every night. But through the darkness, the Ukrainian people have shown impressive bravery and resilience. Ukrainians have stood together to defend not only their land, but also their values, their freedom and their future. A future that they see as a member of the European Union. On my first day in office, during my visit to Kiev, I met Maxim Butkevich, a human rights activist. He had spent 2 years in Russian captivity. He told me, what helped me survive was believing in values. Values gave him hope. He looked at the European Union as a guardian of human dignity, of freedom and democracy, of solidarity and human rights. His dream of a better tomorrow gave him hope during the darkest times. Many in Ukraine look to Europe because they have seen a world without values, a world of brutality, injustice and impunity. This is the fundamental issue at the heart of this war. What kind of world do we want to live in? A world where military power dictates the fate of nations, or a world built on rules, rules that ensure that every nation has the right to decide its own future. The courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people have inspired the world, but inspiration alone is not enough. This is not just Ukraine's fight. It is a fight for the values that defined all us and for Europe's very own security. Ukraine needs our continued political, economic and military support. Ukraine's fight is also our fight for a Europe that values justice over aggression and unity over division. By supporting Ukraine, we are also safeguarding the very foundations of European peace and security. Together, we must remain resolute. The European Commission, together with all institutions and member states, has mobilised unprecedented support for Ukraine on many fronts. Military support to continue its courageous fight against the aggressor, humanitarian assistance for millions of Ukrainians, both those in the country and those seeking protection in the EU, economic and financial support to ensure that states can maintain essential public services and that the economy continues functioning. This includes repairing energy infrastructure, a constant target of Russian attacks, and ensuring with the solidarity lanes that Ukrainian exports can reach the global markets where Ukrainian grain is most needed. We are also setting the foundations of Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction after the devastation of the war. And we are also supporting Ukraine to implement ambitious reforms that will bring it closer to EU membership. On all these fronts, the European Commission is responding decisively in coordination with the Member States. By now, combined support from the EU and Member States exceeds 134 billion. Together, we are the largest international donor and the largest public investor in Ukraine's defence sector. Let me give you some examples. We have established the Ukraine facility, which is providing up to 50 billion in grants and loans. This helps Ukraine continue functioning and advance its ambitious reform agenda. The Ukraine facility comes on top of more than 28 billion in macro-financial assistance that the EU has provided since 2022. We have also mobilised 48.5 billion in crucial military support. We have contributed over 1 million rounds of ammunition and will have trained 50,000 soldiers by the end of this winter. 4.5 million people who fled the war have received temporary protection in the EU, and we are working closely with international and European financial institutions to set the foundations of Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction. The EU has taken resolute steps to support Ukraine, and our commitment must not waver. Ukraine deserves just peace. We must put Ukraine in a position of strength, especially ahead of potential discussions to end this war of aggression. Ukraine will need strong, credible, long-term security guarantees to deter future attacks. The EU will continue using revenues from immobilised Russian assets to support Ukraine's defence industry, provide ammunition and air defence, and finance urgent reparations of energy infrastructure. Work is ongoing to integrate EU and Ukrainian industrial bases. And the European Union is preparing further sanctions packages to further hamper Russia's ability to wage this war. At the same time, we will continue supporting Ukraine implement the necessary reforms in their path towards the European Union. This is where they belong. The Ukrainian people are undertaking tremendous efforts under very difficult circumstances, and the European Union should recognise this. This is the merit-based nature of the EU enlargement policy. We should match their efforts and open the first negotiation cluster, the cluster on fundamentals, as soon as possible this year. Our European message to Ukraine is clear. Ukraine is part of our European family. We will stand with you and we will bring you in the European Union where you belong.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. And now I give the floor to Mr. Michael Gala on behalf of the EPP.
Presidency, colleagues, Szanowni Ukraińskie Druzy. It is with sorrow but also outrage and undiminished resolve that we commemorate the 3rd anniversary of Russia's full-scale, illegal and unprovoked war of aggression against the Ukrainian nation. Our thoughts are with those who gave the ultimate sacrifice for the freedom of their country and their families and loved ones. The character of Putin's Russia is that of a terrorist state that respects no international law, disregards basic human rights and basic principles that the civilized world has agreed upon even in times of war. Both Ukrainian and Russian lives are irrelevant in the imperialist agenda of the dictator and the Kremlin. It is this Parliament that has and will always defend Ukraine's legitimate resistance as Ukrainians defend our values and are attacked exactly for this reason. Ukrainians are the first to seek an end to this dreadful war. We insist that on upcoming occasions like the Munich Security Conference, nothing is discussed about Ukraine without Ukraine, and nothing is decided without involving us Europeans. We will be prepared to assume greater responsibility when it comes to guaranteeing Ukraine proper security and prepare her membership in EU and NATO. Those arguing for a grey zone of any form only invite the Russian aggressor to progress whenever convenient. We will achieve our goals in unity and with a united Ukraine. I therefore call on the Ukrainian presidential administration and those in their line of command to refrain from partisan games. Stop curtailing the rights of the opposition in Parliament. Stop depriving the former president of his rights as a member of Parliament. Your enemy, our enemy, sits in the Kremlin, not in the Verkhovna Rada. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. And now, on behalf of the Socialists and Democrats, Mr. Maniatis for 1.5 minutes.
Dear colleagues, in a few days we have the 3rd anniversary from Putin's barbaric invasion into Ukraine. Putin believed that the war would only last a couple of days, but the heroism and the determination of Ukrainians means that they are still resisting against the Russians that have even stooped to the level of using North Korean soldiers. We will continue to support Ukraine so that they will be able to provide basic services for their citizens. We need to create the conditions for their economic rebound after the war. So, we need to apply the principle, the polluter pays, as it were, and to do that we need to confiscate Russian assets abroad, because Ukraine needs to rebuild all of its infrastructure for its citizens, and they also need to defend their borders. This is not just an act of solidarity, this is an investment in the security of the European continent, especially for countries like Greece that lie at the border of the EU and face revisionist power like Turkey. It is of vital importance to ensure that the European borders cannot change by force. Thank you.
Thank you. And now on behalf of the Patriots Group, Mr. Csaba Domot.
Thank you, President. Regarding the war, fundamentally we condemn Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Ukraine has the right to territorial integrity, and we must extend a helping hand to those in need. This is why several thousand child Ukrainian refugees are in school in Hungary. But we have to talk about the economic aspects too, because in this House there is often such commitment to continuing the war that we never discuss the economic burden of that war. There is a summary from the Council according to which the EU and the Member States have so far supported the war with no less than 134 billion euros. This is 3 times the amount paid out on regional development during the current programming period. The amount paid out for the war is equal to 10% of the total 7-year EU budget. It's brutal. The only thing more shocking is the future outlook. We know that the USA is going to withdraw its financial support for the war, yet the EPP-left Grand Coalition intends to continue upon this path. unconditionally, so they will even pay the same amount or even more for the purpose of war. All of this while the European economy is stagnating, so there is highly unlikely to be any more money available. So they should say where they will take this money from. The Cohesion Fund, Erasmus, from the farmers, perhaps. We can see what the media thinks about this, which they've been stuffed with. This media has been stuffed with money from the Biden administration. We can see this on the front pages, and they are asking European people to pay the invoice for this. And much has been said, but they shall not make us pay the price for this war.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Bilan from the ECR.
Mr. President, dear Commissioners, 24th of February will mark 3 years since Russia launched its full-scale war of aggression against Ukraine. 3 years of brutality, destruction and immense sacrifice. Ukraine has stood firm, fighting not only for its sovereignty, but for the very principles that define Europe, freedom and democracy. Today, let us not forget the tremendous cost Ukraine has been paying for standing against Russia for Europe's security. Bucha's horrors, far over 10,000 civilian deaths, tremendous military losses, and 10 million refugees, and Ukraine's shattered infrastructures. These wounds will scar generations. Europe has responded. We have imposed unprecedented sanctions, reduced our reliance on Russian energy, strengthened defence cooperation and increased military support. Yet, disturbingly, some voices still call for easing these sanctions. I am proud to say that today that my country, Poland, has been at the forefront of military, diplomatic and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. We have committed nearly 5% of our GDP, the highest in the EU relative to our economy. Our support was among the first to reach the Ukrainian front in significant quantities. We provided the largest number of heavy weapons and remain one of the top countries hosting Ukrainian refugees. Under former Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki's leadership, Poland was one of the first to send tanks, fighter jets and ammunition. And let us not forget the historic visit of March 2022 when Mr. Morawiecki, Deputy Prime Minister Jarosław Kaczyński, along with Czech and Slovenian leaders, became the first foreign leaders to stand with President Zelensky in Kiev. Their message was clear then and it remains clear today. Ukraine is not alone. Our duty is clear. We must stand with Ukraine, not only now, but in the long rebuilding ahead. The war's outcome must be defined by Ukraine with unwavering European support. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, on behalf of Renew Europe, Mr. Petras Austravicius.
Mr. Chair, Madam Commissioner, Minister, dear colleagues, Ukraine, hand in hand with its Western partners, has withstood 3 years of bloody and devastating aggression by Russia and its proxies. Respecting the immense price paid by defenders of Ukraine and the defenders of our European values, the European Union efforts must now focus on the following. First, EU, from the very beginning and fully, must participate in the forthcoming ceasefire or peace talks. The outcome of these negotiations will determine the long-term future security of Europe. Second, we must continue our military assistance to Ukraine and provide it with maximum security guarantees. Russia has no intention of changing, and we must be ready. Third, we must continue to work hand in hand to help Ukraine reform and integrate into the European Union. I really hope that the 3 years of Russian aggression and the horrors it has inflicted on the Ukrainian people have revealed the true face of Russian imperialism and international terrorism, and that we have learned a lesson for future that we must not forget, for victory of Ukraine and ours. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Willy Somdal. 1 minute.
3 years. For 3 years, people in Ukraine have been terrorized every day by Putin's war machine. An attack, a terrifying attack on a land with helpless civilians, and the West is trying to help them to survive with the attacks on critical infrastructure, which is affecting innocent people who are going through a third winter without light, without heat in many cases. And the EU and the USA have both together supported Ukraine's fight for freedom, but now it looks uncertain. It looks as though the American situation is different because of the self-centered oligarch in charge. We have to do what we can. We have to make it clear to Putin that after this merciless and unprovoked war, we must do more to support.
Thank you.
Danilo della Valle Congan per 3 minuti.
President, Europe cannot be left out of the peace negotiations in Ukraine. We don't want to see the crocodile tears of a political class, including Kallas, von der Leyen, Meloni, who have failed all along the way and have made Europe weaker in the world. The management of this war will probably be studied in the universities throughout the world in the coming years as one of the greatest failures of the EU's external policies since its inception. We need to take the situation in Ukraine in our hands by accepting a diplomatic way out. And instead, you have taken up missiles, drones, guns, and even the idea of sending our armies to the battleground. Despite the sabotage of Nord Stream 2, this parliament continues to listen to delirious ideas that we can beat Russia in the battlefield without taking into account the current situation. You followed Biden, and now you'll probably follow Trump. But enough. Stop. Have you not done enough? EU citizens are paying the price. Ukrainian citizens are suffering because you are not able to carry out the diplomacy and mediation that has always characterized Europe. Now, under Trump's plans, the EU could sit idly by and sadly watch history unfold. Let's go back to speaking about peace.
Thank you. Now, Europe of Sovereign Nation Group, Petras Gražulis, 1 minute.
Sveiki. Jeigu Europa būtų vieninga.
Thank you very much. If the EU is united and strong, with solid principles, then there would be no war at all in the Ukraine. It would never have happened. We have to say to Putin that we defend Europe and Ukraine to the hilt. In that case, Putin would not have invaded Ukraine in the first place. With unity, Europe is strong. But the military support we supplied was not enough, and that allowed Putin to do well in his war. Aren't you ashamed of that? We are one of the biggest economic powers in the world, and now the American president is promising to put an end to this war. This is a humiliation. You should have solved this problem before. That would have been true deeds, and that would have helped Ukraine better.
The first round is over. I just would like to say that we are closing KGI requests, so no more new registration. We are in a time constraint. Rasa Juknevičian will be the next speaker, please.
Dear colleagues, this debate on Ukraine is fundamentally about us, about Europe and its future. Our future has two opposing scenarios, one in the event of a Ukrainian victory, the other very dark, if we fail to help Ukraine to win. In Davos, President Zelensky said, "Let's not forget, there is no ocean separating European countries from Russia, and European leaders should remember this." He called on Europe to get serious about its security. That's why we need a clear plan for Ukraine's victory now. We need to act fast. I stress a victory plan. It's not just about weapons. That's the most important thing today, but there is more. It's also about enlargement, about energy policy, about technology, about industry, about everything that will make Europe a global player. It's impossible without Ukraine. There will be no long-lasting peace in Europe without a Ukrainian victory. There will be no strong and competitive Europe without a free Ukraine and defeated imperialistic colonial Russia. Slava Ukraini!
Paldies. Vārds Kathleen van Bremt.
Thank you. Now Kathleen van Bremt, 1.5 minutes.
Dank u very much, voorzitter. Het is bijna onvoorstelbaar, maar het is inderdaad 3 jaar.
Thank you. It seems incredible. But yes, it's been 3 years since a war of aggression by Russia broke out in Ukraine. Infrastructure has been destroyed. Many children have been deported. Many people have lost their lives. It's absolutely horrible. But Europe's response has been strong. Europe has condemned this illegal war. 3 years of European solidarity, of support with Ukraine. And there's great solidarity within this parliament in as much as the fact that we need to keep giving support as long as possible. The commissioner spoke very pertinently. Ukraine's future is in Europe. So 3 years of war, and it's still not over. But we need to start thinking about reconstruction, about strengthening democracy, about free elections. It won't be tomorrow, but we need to start preparing things. We need to be ready so that Ukraine can be open and progressive with strong institutions, with solid rule of law, and we need to be ready to offer them our support. And so that Ukraine can truly move towards the EU.
Thank you, and then Pedro Martione, 1.5 minutes.
Vu depuis les capitales.
Mr. Tune, from European capitals, the war that has been raging for 3 years is exactly a fight between good and evil, OTAN, the NATO versus Russia. Beyond our strategic ideas, we've missed the point of this war. This war is it's aggression by Moscow and national liberation for Ukraine. Between 1917 and 1920, Ukraine had proclaimed its independence, but again, unlike the Poles, the Finns, or the Baltic countries, they were not able to keep it because it was shaken from the inside and invaded from the outside. Ukraine has a long-standing existence as a state, and they keep fighting for the right to exist. We can't forget Metternich, who said that Ukraine was vitally strategic. And now in the 21st century, the people's rights are being denigrated. Despite the attempts of eradication of their culture, Ukrainians have a strong identity. Ukrainian soldiers in the front are guarding their borders and fighting for freedom. After the fall of the Soviet Union, there was the question of a post-imperial Russia, and now Ukraine is trying to go against this. Ukraine should, with each passing day, Ukraine is more and more of a nation state.
Now Reinis Pozniaks, 1 minute.
Dear Mr. President, Madam Commissioner, dear colleagues, some time ago, Mr. Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, visited the SEDE committee. He said that if we do not invest enough in our defense, we may be forced to move to New Zealand or learn Russian. I will add to what Mr. Rutte said. The aforementioned options will remain for the lucky ones. The less lucky ones may have to move to a village in Siberia, traveling in rail carriages for cattle. And the least lucky will be shot in the cellars of their homes, according to lists prepared beforehand. By the way, such lists already exist. The Baltic states and Ukraine have experienced this already during the years of the Soviet occupation, and Ukraine experiencing this once again, and we can see that during these 80 years nothing has changed in the methods Russia is applying. Therefore, support to Ukraine is the best and the most efficient investment in our security and defense. Thank you.
Paldies.
Thank you. The next is Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, 1 minute.
Herr Vorsitzender.
President, Commissioner, 3 years of murder, destruction, rape and kidnap. And Europe must continue to be on the side of the Ukrainians and explain what is happening to people in that country. Yes, even if there are peace negotiations, 80 years after the end of the Second World War, we have to sit on the Ukrainian side of the table, so that it's not the USA or Russia that decides about the future, how the future will look at our continent. And with the reconstruction, we also have to stand on Ukraine's side. It is terrible, my ladies and gentlemen, terrible enough that you have the right and left politicians exist who are singing Vladimir Putin's song, that Ukraine is somehow at fault itself of this, or we're at fault. Ladies and gentlemen, as Democrats, we have the majority in this House, and we will not allow that this narrative will fall upon fertile soil.
Jack Zimmerman, you have a blue card from Alexander Sell. Would you accept it? Right. You have said him. Please, you have a floor.
Vielen Dank, Frau Strack-Zimmermann, dass Sie die.
Thank you for allowing this question. So you talk about deliveries of weapons to Ukraine. You say that Russia has to be has to win. So Donald Trump has said that he wants to stop this and has spoken to the Russian parliament, stop the killing. This has been refused, however, on this side. Do you want to continue to deliver offensive weapons to Ukraine, or given that there's a peace initiative from Washington, could we hope that you will keep your games for the carnival?
Ich da nur sagen.
Hello is all I have to say as we greet each other in carnival. So that's it. You're singing Putin's song. Ukraine has to be supported with everything: humanitarian, economic and military aid. Trump said he wants peace. He said he wanted to end the war in 24 hours, and we're at 100 days. Even Trump knows who is sitting on the other side of that table. And for that reason, a clear statement: humanitarian, economic, military help for Ukraine. It's about Europe at the end of the day, and I tell you, even if you don't want to believe it, you will remember this. You will have to remember this. When Ukraine falls, that will not be the last war in Europe, and you will also feel it on your own skin.
So we are in time constraints. So next speaker, nākamais runās Mārtiņš Staķis.
Mārtiņš Staķis.
Paldies, President Kungs. We Latvians see Russia differently because we live beside it. Just imagine an apartment building. We, Latvian and Estonian neighbors, live in the same floor and improving our house day by day. But behind the door, on the east side, there is our unruly tenant living, Russia, who is aggressive, who is drunk, destructive. Our Ukrainian neighbors suffer the most. Every time they rebuild, Russia comes, steals, destroys, and vandalizes. Russia has attacked Ukraine 24 times in the last 300 years. So today they continue to terrorize our floor, but tomorrow they will come to yours. And if you don't stop them, they will burn down the house. So the history shows, ignore the fire won't save you, it only lets the flame spread. And that's why our unruly tenant deserves a very hard lesson. Thank you.
Paldies. Vārds Jonas.
Thank you. The next speaker is Jonas Fjöst at 1 minute.
Tack, herr talman. Thank you very much, President, colleagues. So, We've got an American president who knows the price of everything but the value of nothing. Trump seems to think that he can negotiate with Putin about the future of Ukraine. We have to insist that if there are going to be negotiations, it has to be Ukraine who decides what they want, and Ukraine has to be at the table. Our task is to strengthen Ukraine and the country's struggle for freedom. We need to increase support, political support, economic support, and military support. Russia does not have the right to a single square kilometre of Ukrainian land. Putin is a war criminal and not a statesman. We can do more. We're still financing Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine through purchases of Russia's export of fossil fuels. These tankers are still going through the Black Sea and the Baltic. It's time to stop them. Time to tighten the screws on Russia. We will support Ukraine.
So about Peter Volgin.
The next one is Peter Molgin, 1 minute.
От дълго време нормалните хора повтарят, че във войната в Украйна може...
So, some people say that the war in Ukraine can only be finished through peaceful negotiations. This is a sensible suggestion, but all of the Democrats have reacted with other slogans. So, war until Zelensky has won. The good thing about that is that in the USA, normality is returning. And perhaps now there will be an opportunity for negotiations and for the war to end in Ukraine. If there's more normality in the USA, then Ursula and Kaya will have to keep talking about unconditional support for Ukraine. And it will take a little bit of time, perhaps, before these ladies understand why they haven't been invited to the peace negotiations. And even if they are invited, they will be playing a useless object that are being pushed around by the main...
The next speaker is Luboš Blaha, 1 minute.
Vážení kolegovia, prepáčte, ale už som otrávený zo...
Dear colleagues, I must apologize, but I find the anti-Russian sentiment here absolutely awful. Ukraine has lost hundreds of thousands of people, and if we had managed to find an agreement with Putin in Istanbul, then we would be at peace now. Secondly, Russia and Russian sanctions, rather, are hurting Europe more than anyone else. Zelensky has turned the gas taps off. This is an arrogant way to behave. The US has changed their position and are going to negotiate with Putin. That's reality. Europe is no longer respected. We can't continue along this road. So I must communicate to you that I will be going to the Russian parliament at the start of March to try and engage in peace negotiations and follow the negotiations. Thank you.
The next speaker is Sandra Kalniet for 1 minute.
Dear colleagues, for 3 years Russia has been continuing the war in Ukraine, and there is no sign of Putin's willingness to end this war. No, he is full of commitment to exterminate the state of Ukraine and to destroy the security system of Europe. Putin knows that the EU's and the US support is not enough for Ukraine to win. We have not done enough, neither in terms of sanctions nor in terms of support, to make Putin realize that he will lose the war and to force him to sit down at the negotiation table. Even if fighting stops in the near future, we will have to arm Ukraine and will have to continue to develop its capacities of arm production. We have to ensure that Russia does not resume its aggression. That means making large investments in Ukraine and also in strengthening the eastern flanks of NATO and the EU. We must not accept Russia's ultimatums or absurd territorial claims. We require strict security guarantees for Ukraine and exercising deterrence towards Russia. No one will do this in our place. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Sven Mikser for 1 minute.
Dear colleagues, 3 years into this war, the fundamentals have not changed. The consequences for European security of a potential Russian victory look as dire today as they did 3 years ago. So we have to get our act together and start giving Ukraine what it needs, in quantities it needs, to win this war. And we should admit to ourselves that whatever the resolution of the war in Ukraine, Russia will remain a clear and imminent threat to Europe's security. So we also have to dramatically improve our defences, including our defence industrial capability. One thing has changed, though. Pro-Russian populists are in a stronger position today than they were 3 years ago, both in this August chamber as well as in increasing number of European capitals. This underscores the need to protect and strengthen our democratic structures, which in turn underscores the need for just and responsible social policies in Europe. For democracy and social stability at home are directly linked to our ability to provide sufficient support to Ukraine.
Thank you. The next is Victoria Ferenc, a minute and a half.
President, Commissioner, MEPs, war, war, war. 3 years, this is all that we've heard day by day in the media. It's terrible to say it, but we've become used to it in a way. We've learnt to live with the fact that there is a war in Europe. At the same time, for Ukrainian population, it's not just a terrible statistic, but it's their everyday experience. The war is not just causing physical damage to a country, but also to people's mental state in the country. So families are being torn apart. Children are growing up without their fathers. Women are having to support their families. And the population has dropped to a half. So the society, it has only got hope that they will have peace at some point. We know, however, that you cannot get a lasting peace through weapons, but only at the negotiating table. And we need to have a peace negotiator from Europe, and we need peace negotiations. We don't need a war that demands people's lives. We have to create pace so that there is finally an end to people's suffering, and so that we can defend the children growing up in the shadow of war and the mental health of those children and of young people. And that is our task.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Alberica Gambino for 1 minute.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, after 3 years of brutal attacks by Russia against Ukraine, our duty is very clear. The European Union needs to keep strong its support towards Ukraine, not only due to its sovereignty, we also need to guarantee our security throughout the continent. Our goal needs to be a just and lasting peace. This means continuing to support Kiev with all the necessary help. And we need to do all the military, rather diplomatic means to find an end to the conflict. We need to put an end to the suffering of millions of people. And so transatlantic cooperation is vital to face this crisis with unity and determination. Let us recall that dialogue with the United States is vital because it is our main ally and partner when we're facing such interconnected global crises. The European Union cannot allow itself another reality. We need to continue without losing sight of the imperative of peace, and the speaker has been cut off.
So we have to be fair to everybody. Hilde Woutmans will be the next speaker.
Thank you very much, President. Colleagues, we have heard this many times today. 3 years of this awful Russian-Ukrainian war. And we have heard colleagues say, yes, we have supported the Ukrainians for 3 years. Well, that's all well and good, but we have to be honest, rather half-heartedly, with our foot on the brakes. Yes, we sanctioned Russia. Again, That's good, but we have to be honest about this. It was half-heartedly. We have had 15 sanctions packages, and so, colleagues, we have to remember the pain of the Ukrainians. Gas prices are at the highest point in 2 years, and we're paying for that. Colleagues, this war has been going on for far too long. Today, we have to say that it must end this year, and the best way to achieve that is by a number of means. One, we have to deliver weapons. We have to implement the sanctions against everyone. And thirdly, we have to strengthen Europe. Thank you.
Sergei Lagodinsky kungam vienai minūtei, lūdzu.
Now, Mr. Lagodinsky, to 1 minute, please.
Ukrainian. Цю промову я виголошую українською мовою з двох причин.
I will be speaking Ukrainian.
Unfortunately, there is no Ukrainian interpretation.
There is a Ukrainian.
So as I was informed, sorry about that. You can start again. Yeah.
Thank you. Цю промову я виголошую українською мовою.
I wish to speak in Ukrainian, first of all, to demonstrate to you, dear colleagues, parliamentarians, politicians, that we can only speak our language. Our language is Ukrainian, and therefore decisions which affect Ukrainians cannot be taken behind their backs. And I now wish to address Ukrainians in their own language because they are suffering from torture and humiliation. They are on the battlefield and in torture chambers. But Ukrainians are strong. They are resilient. Dear Ukrainians, thank you. Thank you for your determination and your courage. Glory to Ukraine.
Thank you. And now Hans Neuhaus for 1 minute, please.
Dear colleagues, the years of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine are also the years of the final geopolitical failure of the European Union. The failure is final because it really represents the end of a development that actually began with a US decision, the decision to bring Ukraine into NATO. For a quarter of a century now, Europeans have been led by the nose through the geopolitical theatre created by the US. I refer you to Mr. Timmermans, who talked about the end to these negotiations, the end of the war in Ukraine, negotiations that would be conducted without heads of state and government in Europe, or indeed possibly without Ukraine itself. At the end of the day, what we Europeans are called upon to do is to pay for this war. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's proof, if proof were needed, that this war is basically a geostrategic conflict between two great powers, and it proves also that the EU is not a relevant geopolitical player. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Fabio De Masi for 1 minute, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, the fact of the matter is that the Ukrainians were indeed betrayed, but for other reasons than many have rehearsed here. They have been sent to fight an unwinnable proxy war, and all talks about a NATO perspective for Ukraine have simply been swept to one side, and Charles Kopshin, who was Obama's former security advisor, characterized it as a big mistake. It was something that was dismissed. But then in 2020, we were on the verge of a peace settlement, and that came to nothing because the Ukrainians said that they wanted to fight on, and we have more than 1 million casualties and deaths. In the meantime, the country has been laid to waste, it is destroyed, and it is poised to lose at least part of its territory. And this shows the emptiness of political words, and it is time to put an end to the fighting. We need negotiations on a ceasefire. We need mutual security assurances, but these bloody words will prove to have been a historical mistake.
And now, Michal Szczerba for 1 minute, please.
Szanowny Panie Przewodniczący.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, Minister, ladies and gentlemen. 3 years now. This war has been going on for 3 years. We've seen the support of our allies to Ukraine. We want Ukraine to win. We want to see a reconstruction of Ukraine. And we want Ukraine to become a strong European country. Because it will make Europe stronger too, and it will make Europe more safe. 3 points I'd like to raise in this debate. First of all, we need a common migration strategy. And we also need to deal with the democratic crisis that is looming in Ukraine. There are many, many Ukrainians who have left the country during this conflict. They have fled. They should be allowed to return home to Ukraine in order to rebuild the country, to develop the country. We're really talking about a major democratic crisis. Secondly, we need to support veterans. 2 million veterans, according to estimates, at the end of this war. We need to support them physically, psychologically. And thirdly, we also need to talk about a political dialogue.
Switched off, yeah. So, next speaker, Thijs Reuten, for 1 minute.
President, Commission, colleagues, Council. 3 years full-scale invasion and Russian brutality. What did we learn? Ukraine has already won. Ukraine will be EU member and we will be stronger with them. And Europe is stronger and more resilient than many thought. Yes, we did a lot financially and militarily, but was it enough? Was it enough? No. We delivered too late and too little on crucial military support to protect Ukrainians and to defend Europe. Yes, to defend Europe. It is not over. Promises of a quick peace without leverage over Putin don't work. Peace through strength, not without Ukraine, about Ukraine, is also about our strength and also not about Europe without Europe. We can enable Ukraine militarily, curb the shadow fleet, reinforce sanctions and fight Putin's influence in Europe. Peace needs enforcement and solid security guarantees. As we honor the brave Ukrainians, the brave heroes of Ukraine, we should all ask ourselves how much Europe is worth to us as we know it. And this is how much we need to invest in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Petra Steger, for 1 minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, the war in Ukraine is now moving into its 4th year. And in the meantime, we're having the umpteenth debate on showing solidarity with Ukraine. But nobody really asks themselves why. Why should we show unreserved solidarity? Why should these deliveries of billions worth of weapons not come with conditions? Why should we not be showing solidarity towards our own people? When are we going to put an end towards these policies which are in fact counter to our own interests? We need a new title for these plenary debates. How about It's Time for Peace? That would be more appropriate because since the beginning of this appalling war, we have had no peace initiatives from this so-called peace European Union. Instead, we have sacrificed our prosperity and citizens have never been consulted. They've never been asked whether they are okay with this, if they're happy to foot the bill for this tragedy. So it's high time that people sat down and you ought to be reminded of what you're supposed to be doing, what your duty really is, and that is to seek peace.
Thank you very much. Micro is switched off. So next speaker, Jack Madison, for 1 minute.
Thanks so much. It's always lovely to see how the chambers are fighting with each other in the chamber. Anyway, for 3 years, a lot of talk, no results. I think we have no doubt that in the next few months we're going to have negotiations for the peace. So we will reach for that. But the problem is that in which kind of terms we have. Today, currently in Europe, we don't have any kind of leader who will be equal to negotiate with Trump, Zelensky and Putin. Is it Kaja Kallas? Definitely not. Ursula? No. So the problem now is that Europeans love to talk a lot and to make your own green deals, fight for the climate change. But in the reality, we have been talking for 3 years, and now, of course, from the Different sides, they are screaming about the human lives, how we need peace. But the problem is that we have had peace several times with Russia, and nobody has given a shit about the result, that their territories are occupied, people are murdered, killed, raped, and we are just loving to talk here for 3 years. Very lovely story. The problem now is that we are not still investing enough for our defense. We are still buying. We are the biggest importer of the LNG from Russia. We are paying billions of euros to Russia to have war. Great.
Thank you, colleague. Next speaker, Bernard Guetta, for 1 minute.
Eh bien non, Président Trump.
No, President Trump. Unlike what you've said, Mr. Putin is not sad that this war is going on. He's wanted this war for a very long time. He's been preparing it for a long time because the only thing he'll be sad about is that the heroism of the Ukrainians had prevented him from getting to the Polish border, to the border of our union. So stop it, Mr. Trump. Stop talking about the sadness and the humanity of your friend Vladimir. Because if this war was so painful for him, then he could stop it by just recalling his troops. And, President, if there is something you can blame your predecessor for, it's not for having supported Ukraine, but having supported them too little, too late. History will be the judge. But be careful that your country and the world will not pass the harshest judgment against your connivance working with this new Stalin.
For 1 minute, please.
Vážené kolegyně, kolegové.
Colleagues, today it has been 3 years since Russia started its brutal aggression against Ukraine. Unfortunately, today, several times, the question was raised whether it is meaningful to support Ukraine. So let me pose different questions. What would happen if we did not do so? Where would Europe be today if we had been passive, if we didn't open the door to refugees, if we were not united? Russian tanks might today be at the borders of Poland, Slovakia, or the Baltic countries. There would be genocide in Ukraine. The aggressors throughout the world would see that it pays off to wage a war and that the West and Europe are weak and to be taken hold of. If you do not care about values, you are poor in my eyes. But let me speak your transactional language. The price for neutrality would be much higher than the price of our support. This is why we need to remain united and continue our effort. Slava Ukraini.
Susanna Bordenweg.
Thank you. And now the next speaker, Susanna Bordenweg, for 1 minute, please.
There are power games being played behind the scenes, and there are global capitalist interests that have actually kept this war going for 3 years now, and the bodies continue to pile up while we sit here debating. We Hungarians are directly impacted. Let's not forget that the western part of Ukraine had belonged to the Kingdom of Hungary for 1,000 years before it was stripped of its sovereignty and taken from my homeland in 1920. There are Hungarians and Ruthenians who live there, and they've been press-ganged into a war, into death, for a cause that has nothing to do with them. In fact, the current Ukrainian government is unable to guarantee their most basic national minority rights. We should be talking about a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire and peace, particularly if Europe wants to have a seat at the negotiating table. And in order to create a lasting peace, we need to also put on the agenda the question of adjusting borders. It's not been placed on the agenda. It's considered taboo. During the course of this war, Hungary must not give up on ensuring the self-determination of the Carpathian Hungarians and Ruthenians.
Thank you. And now Pekka Toveri for 1 minute.
The war in Ukraine is now in crucial phase. Ukraine is under great pressure, but Russia is not about to win this war. However, Putin seems to think so. Therefore, we need to act decisively to prove him wrong. Russian army is exhausted and its economy is weakening. Now it's time to support Ukraine by funding its defence industry, which is capable to produce material worth over 20 billion euros annually, but it is currently funded only to 30% of its capacity. And we need to hit Russia's economy
for example, by stopping its shadow fleet, which is used to fund this war and what is threatening our seas with environmental catastrophe as we speak. These kind of actions are needed to force Russia to the negotiation table on Ukraine's terms, not in Putin's terms. Ukraine needs peace and security against new Russian aggression. Here, those who worry about the money are selfish. Those who talk about diplomacy don't know Russia. Russia respects only force. Now it's time to use it. Time to act is now. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. And now the Vice President, Pina Picerno. 1 minute, please.
Yes, thank you very much, President. Now, yesterday evening, Donald Trump said that one day Ukraine could become Russian, and he has said that that would mean that the 500 billion we've invested would come to naught. And I think that that is a sign of the worst mercantilist, sovereignist attitude. We should remember that Ukraine's resistance is a fight for freedom. It is a struggle for democracy, as well as the fight to preserve European territorial integrity. And unfortunately, Trump views popular struggles and the fight for freedom as some kind of a commercial transaction or operation from which he can profit. But this is not a business deal, President Trump. Rather, this is the right of a people to fight for its independence after 3 years waging war, the loss of innocent lives, a war which was triggered by Russia in its imperial fight. And that is why we have to fight against barbarism for Ukraine and for Europe.
And now next speaker, Mikhail Dvorchik, for 1 minute, please.
Panie Przewodniczący, koleżanki i koledzy. Za 2 tygodnie miną 3 lata, odkąd Rosja zaatakowała brutalnie Ukrainę i dopuszcza się mordów na cywilach.
Thank you, President. 3 years now of war in Ukraine. Many troops, soldiers, civilians in Ukraine have been killed during that time. The people of Ukraine are fighting for the independence of their country. Poland has always supported this country since the very first day when this war broke out. Other countries were perhaps trying to weigh up whether it was worth supporting Ukraine. The mission continued, the diplomatic mission continued with this work in this country, notwithstanding the war. Now, today we can see that the end of the war may be possible, that peace may be on the horizon, but we have to provide credible guarantees to the Ukrainians. The European Union needs to continue to support Ukraine. It's high time for us to look at our common defence policy and security policy here in Europe and making it the basis for genuine safety for all European countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Helmut Brandstätter, 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner, Minister, dear colleagues. Many important things have been said. I want to concentrate on one group of the victims, that's the children. Just imagine you have a child, you go to bed and you don't know if the child is still alive. Next day in the morning there might be a rocket from Russia. Imagine your child has cancer, you bring it to a hospital and it's killed by a rocket in this hospital. Imagine you have children and they are kidnapped, brought to another country where they tell you that your mother language doesn't really exist and that you have to learn a new one. That's what's happening. And that's one of the reasons why we have to support, why we have to continue to support the Ukrainians. Und ich möchte auf Deutsch meinen Mitbürgern in Österreich sagen, Putin...
I would like to say something to my fellow citizens in Austria. Putin is engaged in a battle against us. This is a hybrid war, and if Ukraine is overrun, then he'll be 500 kilometers from our border. And we wouldn't live in freedom under Putin. So let's make that clear. This is a matter for all of us here in Europe. So let's stick together. Let's stand united for Ukraine, Slava Ukraina.
Thank you. Now, Nicolas Pascual de la Parte for 1 minute, please.
Muchas gracias, presidente.
Thank you, President. After 3 years of war and of death, it seems that we're entering a phase of peace negotiations. But peace has to be fair if it's to be sustainable, has to be based on the principles of the UN Charter. territorial integrity, freedom of any member state to choose their international allies. That's the only way that we can guarantee peace for Ukrainians. And we can't have a peace without Ukrainians. It can't be imposed upon them. They have to decide the terms of peace. We, as the EU, have to help them. We have to help them by ensuring that they have security guarantees, bilateral and collective security, with the potential to enter the EU and NATO at some point. We can't just look at the US. We have to look at what we can do as the EU, as a collective, to ensure that we can offer Ukraine the perspective of peace. We have to act with reality, in a united way, and with our own plan.
Now, Rafael Glucksmann, for 1 minute, please.
Merci.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. 3 years ago, we all said here that Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine was in fact a war against Europe. We were right to say that, but have we then acted accordingly? Ukraine is putting up a heroic fight, but the 200 billion of Russian assets that have been frozen have not been seized at the time in which we are speaking, and is continuing to defy the will of the West. Has cooperation with French companies ceased? No. We are seeing a strategic failure on the part of Europe. Now, Ukraine may seem a long way from here, and Donald Trump is prepared to talk to Putin, but not us, because it is our security and our freedom that is at stake in Ukraine, and that is why Ukraine is on the front line. It's our first line of defense. So let us not fall for the capitulation and submission which has poisoned the debate here this morning. We need to say to Vladimir Putin that the survival of Ukraine is vital for.
Thank you. Now, Sebastian Kinkinen, 1 minute, please.
Mr. President, for 3 long years, Ukraine has stood on the front lines of freedom, facing the brutality of Putin's criminal regime. At the same time, Putin's Russia has shown the world its true nature. It's a terrorist organization with a flag. Putin thought the war would be over in 3 days. He also thought Europe would turn its back on Ukraine. He was wrong. What has Putin on his side besides countries like North Korea? Some MEPs here who demand our defence capabilities to be restricted, who repeat the phrases of Russian playbook, and those who are betraying European values for cheap gas. To them, I say, you will go down in history as traitors. The defenders of Ukraine will be remembered as heroes of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Ivo Davor Stier, 1 minute, please.
Hvala predsjedniče, kolegice I kolege. 3 godine.
Thank you very much, President. Dear colleagues, 3 years after this war of aggression by Russia against Ukraine began, 3 years down the road, we have to state yet again that this appalling war was decided by Putin. He started the war, and he is the one who must put an end to it immediately. Unfortunately, in this chamber, there are always some who decide to follow Russian propaganda and who attack the victims or attack those who help the victims. They're bringing pressure to bear on the victims. Now, that is not a way of stopping the aggressor state from doing what it does. Russia currently occupies Crimea, as well as 4 oblasts in Ukraine. Russia, however, cannot defeat Ukraine, and Russia cannot revert to domination. So, yes, of course, we refer here to negotiations, but I think it's very important to point out that it's not possible for the situation to continue like this with Russia in terms of territory. I say, long live a European.
Now, Marcos Rosemper, for 1 minute, please.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. We've had 3 years of war, 3 years since the invasion, 3 years of a clash between the values of Putin and Europeans trying to help Ukraine survive. We have tried to look at a solidarity mechanism for Ukraine, 500 billion, as part of a financial framework which will be funded by the interest and profits generated by frozen Russian assets. But we have to go even further. There has to be more military, humanitarian, as well as economic assistance. It's important that Ukraine be allowed to prosper after the war and that there be a future for the people with the necessary resources to rebuild infrastructure as well as to modernize the country after years of conflict. And that is why we must not cede in the face of this populist drift in the European Union. Rather, we should be a bastion of democracy and human rights, and we should make sure that we accompany Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Arkadiusz Mularczyk. 1 minute, please.
Panie Przewodniczący, Szanowni Państwo.
President, ladies and gentlemen, 3 years after the brutal war of aggression perpetrated by Russia against Ukraine, 3 years later, I would point out that our solidarity cannot fail. We know from history that solidarity is extremely important. Solidarity cannot be exchanged against a coward's peace. Understand what it means to be deceived by the West, to be let down. The Yalta Conference, 80 years ago now, the Yalta Conference where we saw the domination of Russia in Eastern Europe being accepted, and that has disastrous consequences for us.
Lopatka for 1 minute.
Colleague Steger, you should be ashamed of your speech. 3 years have passed since of aggression against Ukraine, displacing millions and causing immeasurable suffering. And the spirit of the Ukrainian people remains unbroken, demonstrating remarkable resilience against Russian tyranny. And you and your party colleagues are still the voice of Russia here in the European Parliament. But the huge majority here is supporting Ukraine, not least because this struggle is also a struggle and a fight for democracy, freedom and the rule of law globally. And Russia's aggression threatens European and international stability and security. Therefore, we must enhance our support by increasing economic assistance for Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction. We have to counter Russia's propaganda and disinformation.
Colleague Lopatka, would you accept a question from Mr. Jungblut, Alexander? From the EASN? Yes. Because Mr. Sell already was speaking on blue card, I take another one blue card. Jungblut, Alexander, floor is yours.
Ja, sehr geehrter Kollege, Sie haben gerade gesagt.
Our colleague, you have just said that we are responsible for Russia. I mean, that's nonsense. You know, we're all for peace negotiations, peace efforts. I mean, just like President Trump, we want to have the conditions for peace at long last and make sure that Russian and Ukrainian soldiers don't have to die. So, you know, what kind of idea have you got? I mean, you know, what is your conception of peace efforts? I mean, you just think there should be some military victory and even more soldiers will lose their lives. Well, I'll answer very briefly, if I may. Yeah, Putin could end the war immediately. He could do it in a flash. It's in his hands. But it is the Freedom Party of Austria that has a friendship agreement, a friendship treaty with Putin. You haven't dissolved that. I mean, that is your problem. That is your problem. You're on the wrong side here. And we will continue to stand alongside the Ukrainians.
Thank you. In order to be able to hear the next speaker, Tonino Pizzula, please be quiet in the hemicycle. Now, Tonino Pizzula, please.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Commissioner, dear colleagues, 3 years after morning news that changed the world, we can only echo our full support and commitment to Ukrainian people and their heroic fight against the Russian aggressor. The war against Ukraine is now in its critical phase. While the situation remains uncertain in so many ways, it's important to stress that no negotiations can result victoriously and gainful for flagrant aggressor. It's not only an issue of negotiating peace, but keeping it. Furthermore, this is not a war only affecting the European Union, European continent, but also the United States and the rest of the world. The new administration in Washington cannot overlook this and float ideas that may only resonate with transactional logic. We need to reject disinformation and cynicism fueled by the aggressor and his puppets, and stay committed to defend the international rule-based order and values on which the European Union itself was formed. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. Now, Mika Aaltola, 1 minute, please.
Arvoisa puheenjohtaja,
President, there is a brutal war being waged by Russia, but Russia wants to talk to the United States about fragmenting Europe and the peace negotiations. We can't accept that. If Russia wants to negotiate, it has to negotiate with Ukraine, who's supported by Europe. Despite terrorizing Ukraine, Russia has not obtained its objectives, and now they're trying to do that through negotiating with America to achieve something that they didn't achieve through military means. The only way to resolve this war is through negotiating with Ukraine, and we have to be decisive. If we can't defend our own defensive capacity, then we are also at risk. When we take decisions in the world, we have to recognize the real world as it is. We need to ensure lasting peace.
Which would be the last one, blue card in this debate for Merja Kyllönen. Would you agree to take it? Yes, please.
Dear colleague Aaltola, I just want to ask from you that today here we have speak about the war for 3 years. But Russia took Crimea already 2014. How do you see where we really too slowly to act at the first point? Because I think the start point was really when the Russia took Crimea already 2014, and it's more than 10 years now.
Yes, you are quite right. We woke up too late, and back in 2014 we were still under the illusion that gas will produce peace, and it did not. We actually woke up more when the Malaysian flight was shot down than we did when Crimea was taken over. That's a shame. Shame on us on that. Action needs to be taken. Loud words do not defend Ukraine.
Yes, thank you. Next speaker, Tobias Kremer. Colleagues, we are closing blue cards on this debate, so please understand times staying constrained. Please.
Dear colleagues, as the Trump administration is about to unveil its plans for European security, Vladimir Putin continues to arm Russia for future attacks against NATO territory. And Europeans across all our countries are asking themselves, will Europe rise to the challenge, or will we once again allow others to determine the future of our continent? Colleagues, for nearly 3 years, Ukrainians have shown what is possible when courage means unity, For nearly 3 years, they have been defying the doubters and showing Putin that war only ends in disaster. So let us be courageous and united today. Let us move from the ad hoc decision-making to a long-term strategy of funding Ukraine in a socially sustainable way. Let us build a European defence industry that is capable of defending Ukraine and deterring future attacks from Russia, and let us clear the path for Ukrainian EU membership. Only thus can we prove to Putin, to Trump and to every European that in this moment of truth, Europe stands united.
Thank you, colleague. Thank you very much. So, Rico Terras is the next speaker for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. Ukraine still stands. After 10 years, this nation, the people of Ukraine, have demonstrated extraordinary courage and resolution against a much larger and militarily capable enemy. What has Europe done? Far too little. Europe should be ashamed how little we have delivered to Ukraine. Now more than ever, Europe must act and contribute. 0.25% of the GDP to Ukraine. It should not be a slogan. It must be an achievable goal. It's not just a moral obligation for us to help Ukraine. It's for our own security, so that Europe can build up its defence before it is too late. Europe must stand its ground and not let Russia or Americans or whoever make deals without our say. We need to unite. We need more actions in helping Ukraine, in saving Europe. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. Anna Miguel Pedro for 1 minute.
3 anos. 3 anos de destruição.
3 years. 3 years of destruction, resistance and courage. 3 years since the moment when Russia tried to crush Ukraine. They thought that we would be afraid, that we wouldn't react. They got that wrong. 3 years of war, families torn apart, children who have grown up knowing only war, schools being bombed, hospitals being bombed, 3 years of war crimes, 3 years that Europe has had to pay a high price for, because the war isn't just contained in Ukraine, it's actually a war against us. It's a war against what we're prepared to defend, the values that we stand by and that we talk about. 3 years now, 3 years, a war that isn't just about tanks and troops and armies, it's a war about the future. What Russia would want is for might to win. The dictator wants to get what he wants through sheer force. But we have 3 years of resistance, which shows our determination. There's only one choice: to stand by Ukraine until the end.
I would like to warn that, I give only 5 cards, giving priority for any one member for the political group and giving priority to those who didn't speak on a previous procedure, on previous point in agenda. Sousa Silva Helder would be the first.
Senhor Presidente, Senhora Comissária, caros colegas, contabilizamos...
Colleagues, unfortunately, we are now coming to 3 years of Russia's illegal occupation of Ukraine, which has been decided on unilaterally. We've seen millions of deaths and casualties, people who have been displaced, and a people that is being destroyed. Ukraine did nothing to deserve this suffering. All it wished to do was join the European Union and NATO, and wished to join the global first division in terms of countries which nurture democracy, human rights and the rule of law. Basically, they wanted to enjoy better lives. There's no such thing as a just war, but this war is the culmination of injustices. That is why we must support the Ukrainian government and people, because this war against Ukraine is also a war against the people of Europe, and that is why we will continue to support the Ukrainian people in Ukraine until the people is free.
López Aguilar.
Presidente, después de 3 años.
President, after 3 years of this cruel war of aggression by Putin against Ukraine, we have to finally act. We have to provide these financial support to this country for those countries that have received so many people who are displaced due to war. But we can't allow any pretext to ensure that we're not fulfilling the Asylum and Migration Pact. We know that Poland has accepted many of those who are displaced by the war against Ukraine, but we need to also implement the mechanism that will allow the confiscation of goods from Russians. This will require action from the European Union, but we also have to stand with solidarity and support the International Criminal Court, which has been called into question at the moment by the Trump administration. The European Union is a signatory to international criminal treaties. The speaker's microphone has been cut.
Speaker Daņu Žalimas.
Dear colleagues, there are only two ways to achieve a long-lasting peace in a war of self-defense against aggression: victory or capitulation. However, only in case of victory against aggressor we can see legitimacy restored and justice achieved. It means the full restoration of Ukrainian sovereignty, full reparation for all the damages sustained by Ukraine, punishment or by a special tribunal of the Russian and Belarusian leadership for the crime of aggression, as well as holding accountable all those responsible for war crimes. And certainly, the implementation of other principles of the President Zelensky's victory plan, such as the full membership of Ukraine in the European Union and NATO. Justice cannot be separated from peace, and conditions of peace cannot be dictated by the aggressor. They should be determined by the victim and international law. Everything else is the fundamental failure for us political leaders of Europe. Our generation might be remembered with shame and disgust. Do we really want this to be our legacy? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Siegfried Frank Drose.
Thank you very much, President. I wanted to speak to Mr. Gall, who said Slava Ukraina. Now, I wanted to also let you know that in 1920 this was a slogan used by nationalists. Nationalists who actually persecuted the Sinti, the Roma, and many others. So you are calling out Slava Ukraina, Mr. Lopatka too. Please don't forget that. Every month in this House we have a debate on Ukraine. And at the end we basically move forward without Council, without Commission. I think that really Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump will probably put an end to this war without us. And Europe doesn't really play a role in this at all. That's something we should talk about in this Parliament.
Last speaker, Andrei Dostal.
Dear colleagues, the interest of Ukraine or of Ukrainian people is not necessarily the same to interests of Zelensky regime. And the interest of Zelensky regime is not identical with the interests of Central European states as seen on the gas debate. Thanks to new Trump administration, we know for certain that the United States, sponsored by billions of dollars, the media, the NGOs, the quasi-fact checkers, who violently attacked anyone who was anti-war in Europe and even in the United States. This abomination needs to be ended. We cannot suffer this foreign influence. The real interest of Ukraine is the end of war and return to normal life. Our interest is resumption of trade and prosperity. Let us discuss the option openly. I heard here that you would like to prohibit opinions of being told. This is not possible. Each of us MEPs has a full right to say what our political position is. Every child knows that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are closing HI procedure, and I would like to ask to take floor for the Commission. Commissioner Kos, floor is yours.
President, honourable members, it's encouraging to hear today loud voices in the European Parliament supporting to continue the EU support to Ukraine and your clear request to the EU to do more. We all recognise that the EU and its member states have done a lot, but the needs remain huge. Our European assistance to Ukraine is an investment, we have heard this today, in the Europeans' future. Ukraine has to be able to successfully defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. This is not just about Ukraine, this is also about us, about our own security. We will continue providing financial and military assistance with the goal of putting Ukraine in the strongest position ahead of any potential discussions to finally end Russia's aggression and the suffering. Ukraine, this is also what we heard, and the European Union should be involved in the peace talks, and they will be. And we will continue advancing the accession process. All of Ukraine is undertaking tremendous efforts. We should not forget the circumstances under which the politicians, civil servants and society as a whole are working in the same direction to become a part of the European Union. Our objective is to make substantial progress towards accession during this mandate. I'm looking forward to the opening of negotiations on clusters, starting with fundamentals when possible during the Polish presidency in the first half of the year. The European Commission will continue supporting Ukraine in this process. And when we speak about helping Ukraine, we should not forget when the conflicts started. They started when Ukraine decided to go the European way, the way of democracy, the way of European values. Again, I will quote Simone Weil. She said in 1979 that all the member states are confronted with three big challenges: the challenge of peace, the challenge of freedom, and the challenge of prosperity. We could add today the challenge of security. And she also added, those challenges can only be met through the European dimension. And I'm reassured to know that we can count on the support of the vast majority in this House for the future, especially also after the war when we will do the reconstruction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. The floor is now for the Council. Minister Šlapka, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, honourable members, Madam Commissioner. As I have outlined before, the EU and its member states remain committed to providing massive, unprecedented support to Ukraine. We are and remain Ukraine's main supporter. But we are also in critical juncture. Many challenges lay ahead. Maximising EU support for Ukraine is one of the Polish presidency's main goals. EU unity remains key. We need to increase our military support. Ukraine needs more ammunition, more missiles, more air defence and more orders for the Ukrainian defence industry. And we need to continue putting pressure on Russia with our sanctions. It will be essential to bring Russia's unjust war to an end with a just peace in Ukraine, in line with the UN Charter and international law. Ukraine's sovereignty and security must be guaranteed. Ukraine must be involved in peace negotiations, and so must the EU, since peace in Ukraine will determine the European security landscape. We will support Ukraine beyond the war and support its reform efforts and on its European path. This is a priority for the Polish presidency. Madam Commissioner, the Polish presidency is determined and ready for that process. The European Council has stated it many times. The EU remains committed to supporting Ukraine's repair, recovery and reconstruction in coordination with our international partners. I am confident that the EU and its member states will be able to rise to those challenges. And since we are commemorating the 3rd anniversary of full-scale aggression on Ukraine, We know that the war has started with illegal annexation of Crimea. I think here we should remind ourselves one fact, the revolution of dignity, when thousands of Ukrainians gathered on Maidan Niezależności and they were fighting for democracy, freedom, independence, the values. And we should remember that they gathered around the European flag. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, debate is closed and what will take place next session. And this plenary will resume with a formal sitting in a moment. Thank you. Thank you.
Of the Verkhovna Rada, His Excellency Ruslan Stefanchuk.
Thank you, dear colleagues. It is my great honour to welcome to the European Parliament our dear friend Ruslan Stefanchuk, Chairman of Ukraine's Verkhovna Rada. Welcome. This month marks 3 years since Russia launched its brutal, illegal and unprovoked full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Yet, as we enter the 4th winter of war, the world has witnessed the Ukrainian people rise up with courage, with defiance, with an unshakable determination to defend their land and their freedom against all odds. I am proud that this Parliament has stood with Ukraine from the very first moment, united, unwavering and resolute. And our partnership with the Verkhovna Rada has been critical in deepening our ties with the Ukrainian people and preparing Ukraine for its path towards membership. We will keep pushing for peace, but we must not let go of what we mean by peace. Peace must be just. Peace must be dignified, and it must be based on the principle of nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. And for that, Ukraine must be in a position of strength. And that means Europe must do more. More financial support, more military aid, more diplomatic pressure, more humanitarian assistance, because we know that the defence of Ukraine is also the defence of Europe. This is not just an attack on Ukraine, it is an attack on democracy, our way of life, on Europe. So it is my great pleasure to give the floor to you, dear Ruslan Stefanchuk, Chairman of the Verkhovna Rada. The floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, please, I want to ask you to use the headphone. I'll speak in Ukrainian.
Madam President of the European Parliament, dear Roberta. Madam Commissioner Kos, members of the European Parliament, dear friends. I am delighted to have this great honour of coming back before you here in this chamber. I already had an opportunity to address you here in June 2022. It was the eve of a historic day when Ukraine was granted candidate country status for accession to the European Union. And I can remember that day very clearly. In particular, I remember the atmosphere of support, complete support, in this historic building, a building named after the French military nurse Louise Weiss. She was a legendary woman. She survived the horrors of both the First and the Second World War, and she decided to devote herself to overcoming aggression, influencing political processes and international relations. And today, once again, I am greatly honoured to speak before you, to speak from this most authoritative rostrum of the European continent, to address you, members of the European Parliament, and through you to speak to all the citizens of a free Europe. I stand here before you as a representative of the Ukrainian Parliament, a son of the Ukrainian people. We are fighting and we shall prevail. We shall win. Therefore, Madam President, allow me to thank you for this opportunity. Dear Roberta, I really would like to personally give you thanks. Thank you for everything that you're doing for Ukraine and for Europe. Dear colleagues, last year, elections were held here in Europe, and they led to a renewed composition of this European Parliament. On the other hand, they also strengthened the fundamental foundations of Europe, committing ourselves to a united Europe, committing ourselves to common values and common principles. Allow me, therefore, to say to you that both yesterday and today, Ukraine may be tired, but Ukraine is undefeated, and this undefeated Ukraine is deeply grateful to each and every one of you. We are grateful. We're grateful for every vote. We're grateful for every resolution. We're grateful for every action you take in support of our struggle, a struggle for freedom and independence. And in particular, I would like to mention a resolution in this context. It's a resolution that deals with the need for continued European Union support for Ukraine, a resolution that you adopted on 17 July last year. Allow me to take this opportunity to express my gratitude for your support, the support that you have afforded to Ukraine in our struggle over the course of the last 3 years. We're talking about more than 4 million Ukrainians who have been granted temporary protection status. And it was thanks to you and your colleagues that we were able to mobilise 50 billion euros of military support for Ukraine and also for the programme entitled Ukraine Facility. The EU military assistance mission to Ukraine has already trained more than 70,000 Ukrainian soldiers. My deepest gratitude to you for this. Dear colleagues, in a fortnight, Ukrainians will commemorate for the third time the events of February 24, 2022, when, early in the morning, Russia launched its massive rocket attacks targeting our cities and our villages, and where Russian troops began invading our territory, sowing death and destruction as they came. The war continues every day. Every night, innocent people are dying. Every day, children are fearing for their lives. They're afraid. Their mothers are grieving and crying. They cry for everything that they have lost. Russia is inexorably trying to ruin our Ukrainian lands. Russia is making desperate attempts to move towards the west, towards Kyiv. But, dear friends, that also means that they are attempting to move towards Warsaw, towards Strasbourg, towards Brussels. And if Russia is not stopped in its tracks, it will only be a matter of time before Russian soldiers start kicking down the doors of a sleeping citizen in Budapest. This is what happened in 1956, remember, or indeed targeting a citizen of Prague, which is what happened in 1968, and it's exactly what happened in Bucha and Irpin 3 years ago. Please, dear friends, believe me when I say that the war is much closer than we might think. In 1991, Ukraine became independent. And in 1994, our predecessors signed the Budapest Memorandum. And at the time, we thought that our trials were over forever. How naive we must have been. Today, we know perfectly well that history cannot be forgotten. All the lessons of history, old and new, can never be forgotten. History is not something we can take lightly. History must be well known and must be recalled, particularly when we're dealing with a history of aggression, occupation and abuse. So the peoples enslaved by Russia, to what extent do they know this and remember this? Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, they felt it firsthand. Moldovans, Georgians have learnt it, and I very much hope that they will never forget it. Because unpunished evil will continue to spread as long as we allow it to do so. That is why, dear colleagues, I would say that peace can only be achieved if we stand strong. We have the power of our unity, of our determination. We have the power of putting consolidated pressure on the aggressor. And that is why each of us has a huge responsibility to bear for the fate of our countries, our peoples, for the fate of Europe, for the fate of a civilized world. Let's not forget that. But, dear friends, the only way to stop an aggressive Russia and to achieve a just and lasting peace is to support Ukraine so strongly that the aggressor will not only be stopped in its tracks on Ukrainian soil, but also will face international sanctions and internal problems. We are well aware of the urgent needs of Ukraine. We need more air defence systems, more aeroplanes, more long-range artillery, more electronic warfare equipment, more investment into the Ukrainian military industry. So, dear colleagues, what I would say to you is that the more effective the sanctions, the better off we will be. Sanctions cannot be avoided or circumvented. More determination in seizing and freezing Russian assets. We need fair and clear punishment for the terrible war crimes being committed, for the air strikes, the missile strikes on civilians, the torture and murder of civilians, our unarmed soldiers. Russia has crossed all the red lines imaginable in this war. Ukraine is a victim of this aggression. And Ukraine, like its partners, have never crossed any of those red lines. Dear friends, the only lines that we have to erase today are the lines of fear, the lines of indecision, of delay and despair. Ladies and gentlemen, I will never forget that day, 3 years ago, 4 days after Russia's full-scale invasion, when, together with President Volodymyr Zelensky and the Prime Minister of my country, I signed Ukraine's application for membership of the European Union. I am proud to belong to a nation that, despite this unprovoked and brutal aggression, despite these terrible losses, has set itself a difficult but vital task, namely to become a member of a large European family. Dear friends, we have set ourselves a task to return to a common European home. Dear friends, since the creation of the European Union, none of the countries that have embarked on the path of integration into the EU, none of them has paid such a terrible price for the legitimate right to be a part of the European family as Ukraine, what Ukraine has paid and continues to pay. However, I'm convinced that Ukraine will become a member of the European Union. And, furthermore, dear friends, I would say that we will become stronger. We will come out stronger and better after this war, because we're committed to a reform process, because one of our most important tasks ahead of us is to open our first cluster of negotiations during the Polish presidency. That will be an incredible momentum given to further progress. So Ukraine is not just expressing its desire to be a part of the European Union, we're also seeking to make it a reality. Madam President, Madam Commissioner, dear members of the European Parliament, the next phase will be crucial for the outcome of this war, for the future of European security and for transatlantic unity. Our task will be to preserve what brings us together, to secure a just and lasting peace for Ukraine and Europe. Establishing peace through strength is the only way to stop the world's tyrannies. Like 3 years ago, millions of Ukrainians today once again are awaiting with great hope for good news to emerge from the European Parliament in Strasbourg, from Washington, London, Paris, Brussels, Berlin. News that demonstrate that we are not alone in this new and last war, that the war will soon be over, because we have the strength, we have the justice of European and world democracy on our side. Dear friends, Madam President, neither you nor ourselves can afford to not be there for this task. We must stand firm. Dear friends, it is no coincidence that I mentioned the legendary Louise Weiss at the very beginning of my address to the House. She was driven by a sense of duty. She put on a uniform, and twice she stood up to defend her homeland as a military nurse and as a member of the resistance movement. She did so as have millions of Ukrainians today. They are standing up to defend their dear homeland. And owing to the current circumstances, I have twice spoken to this European Parliament in this chamber wearing my uniform, my military uniform. But indeed, just like my dear compatriots, I have a great dream to replace this uniform with civilian clothes. That is my dream. My dream is to My dream, our dream, is to replace weapons with tools to work. We also dream of replacing air raid alerts with smartphones. We hope no longer to have such an application for air raid alerts on our smartphones in the future. We very much hope that we can erase these applications altogether in future. Dear friends, we want to replace war with peace. Once again, thank you for your kind attention. Glory to Ukraine. Slava Ukraina.
Thank you, Ruslan. I will never forget those moments in Kiev at the start of the invasion. I told you then that we are with you, and as you can see, we stayed with you and we will stay with you. Slava Ukraini. Okay, so we go straight to the votes. Thereby the sitting is resumed. We vote first on a report by Mr. Thomas Tobert on the conclusion of an agreement between the European Union. All right, are you ready? Okay. And the Government of the People's Republic of Bangladesh on certain aspects of air services. It's a vote on consent. By roll call, the vote is open. Vote is closed. And it is adopted. We move to the report by Mr. Paulo do Nascimento Cabral on the conclusion on behalf of the Union of the protocol implementing the Fisheries Partnership Agreement between the European Community and the Republic of Cape Verde. Vote on consent by roll call. Vote is open. Vote is closed. Adopted. We move to the report by Mr. Boris Budka on the renewal of the agreement on cooperation in science and technology between the European Community and Ukraine. Vote on consent by roll call. Vote is open. Vote is closed. And it's adopted. This is the last vote that we have ahead of us, so please, if you're on the speakers list for the next item, stay in the chamber. So we move to the report by Ms. Anouk van Broek on the European Central Bank Annual Report 2024. Amendment 33 by show of hands. Who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Rejected. Amendment 22 by roll call. Vote is open. Vote is closed. Rejected. Amendment 23 by roll call. Vote is open. Vote is closed. Rejected. Amendment 34. Who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Rejected. 35. Who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Rejected. We vote on the original text. Who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Okay, we check this. Original text. Vote is open. Vote is closed. And it is adopted. We move to Amendment 24. Who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Rejected. Amendment 25. Who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Rejected. Paragraph 8 in two parts, both by roll call. First part, vote is open. Vote is closed. Adopted. Second part, vote is open. Vote is closed. Rejected. Amendment 10. Who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Adopted. Amendment 30 by roll call. Vote is open. Vote is closed. Rejected. Amendment 11. Who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Adopted. Amendment 12. Who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Adopted. Amendment 1. Who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Rejected. Amendment 26 by roll call. Vote is open. Vote is closed. Rejected. Amendment 36. Who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Rejected. Amendment 37. Who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Rejected. We move to the original text in two parts. First part, who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Adopted. Second part, who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Adopted. Amendment 38. Who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Rejected. Amendment 39. Who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Rejected. We vote on the original text in three parts, all by roll call. First part, vote is open. Vote is closed. Adopted. Second part, vote is open. Vote is closed. Adopted. Third part, vote is open. Vote is closed. Adopted. Paragraph 25 by roll call. Vote is open. Vote is closed. Adopted. Amendment 27 by roll call. Vote is open. Vote is closed. Rejected. So we vote on Amendment 40. Who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? Rejected. Amendment 5. Who's in favour? Who's against? Who abstains? We check this. Amendment 5. Vote is open. Vote is closed. And it is adopted. So we move to Amendment 2 by roll call. Vote is open. Vote is closed. Rejected. Amendment 41 by roll call. Vote is open. Vote is closed. Adopted. Paragraph 27 in two parts, both by roll call. First part, vote is open. Vote is closed. Adopted. Second part, vote is open. Vote is closed. Rejected. Amendment 6 by roll call. Vote is open.